Welcome to episode 82 of the Weesports Chronicles podcast, Masters Edition. The 2020 Masters is in the books. I'm your host, lukasweese, and here to put a bow on the 2020 Masters, I'm pleased to be joined by Will Gray of NBC Sports. Will, welcome to the podcast. How you doing, man? Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, Luke, it's good to be with you. I appreciate that. There were a long stretch of 2020 where I was not sure we were going to have a 2020 Masters. Now we have gotten there. It's in the books. We've got DJ in the green jacket. We've got a quick turnaround to 2021. So all things considered, pretty good.
144 days, Will, till the 2021 Masters, which is pretty sensational. But here we are with, as you said, Dustin Johnson being the 2020 Masters champion, winning his second major, and also setting the tournament record with a 72-hole score, beating Tiger and Jordan Spieth's 72-hole score. So maybe just start by your thoughts of today. I mean, I know he entered the day 4 strokes ahead, and it was a little bit bumpy to start, but then he definitely rounded the ship and was able to hold on to win.
Yeah, I think that it was interesting. You know, he played so well Saturday in the third round that everyone kind of couched it last night of, well, how exactly could he blow it from here? And I think that speaks a lot to the tumultuous relationship that DJ has had with majors, where we've seen him before. Coming into today, he was 0 for 4 with at least a share of the 54-hole lead. He had lost, with penalties on 18. He had been outplayed as he was by Colin Morikawa. August PGA. Every way you could lose it, DJ has found a way, and it did get a little tight there. Certainly, after the bogeys on 4 and 5, all of a sudden he's only one shot up after going from 4 to 1 in the span of 5 holes, and you started to look at it and you thought, all right, well, if it was going to start to fritter away, there were all these comparisons to Norman and Faldo in '96. That was kind of how it needed to start, but very quickly from there, he birdies 6, he steadies the ship. And the back 9 was essentially a coronation, which, all things considered, good for him. He deserved that, and it was great to see him win in emphatic fashion after coming up short so many times before in majors.
Absolutely, and certainly, as you said, I mean, the 0 for 4 with a 54-hole lead, certainly staggering. And I know that he did win a major at the 2016 U.S. Open at Oakmont, but he talked about in his post-round press conference about getting that second major, and often when you get that second major, it sort of etches you into a more higher echelon of golfers. I mean, obviously DJ coming into this Masters, I mean, he had won 23 times on the PGA Tour. He already had a major, but now that he has the 2 majors as well as a FedEx Cup, where do you sort of put him amongst his peers, just in terms of his legacy? That's still a lot more to be written, according to DJ.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that we've spent so much time, we talk about who's the best player without a major, and that's such an easy, it's a low-hanging fruit topic of discussion. But we got to a point now where there was a bottleneck of one-time major winners, and the question was, who's going to break out of that group, whether it's Jason Day, Justin Rose, Adam Scott, DJ, Henrik Stenson. The list goes on and on of guys who in the last 5, 6, 7 years have gotten a major, they've gotten over the hurdle, and they haven't yet added a second. Certainly Dustin Johnson has the accolades that would put him head and shoulders above most people in that group. But, I do think it's interesting that if DJ had only won one major, and even with the FedEx Cup this year and all the cash money in the bank, I do think he would have gone down as one of the greatest underachievers of his generation. I think that speaks to his talent level and just how good he is, that he could win 20 times, including a major, and that career would still be looked at, and you'd think, hey, he didn't get as much out of that as he should. Winning now this week, adding a Masters next to a U.S. Open at an iconic course like Oakmont, that's absolutely going to bolster his legacy. And at 36, he could certainly add another one in 5 months, 144 days, as you mentioned. No one is going to expect that this is the last we've heard from Dustin Johnson. He's world number 1 for a reason. But I do think that, especially for a guy of his caliber and of his immense talent and credentials, going from 1 to 2, that matters a lot.
Brooks Koepka can no longer say he just has one major, right? So
he's got half.
He's got half.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's It's interesting because if you look at the round today, I mean, obviously, I think the birdie on 6 was important in sort of getting the round back together. But DJ mentioned after his round that the third shot on 11, getting it to within a makeable par range was really important, and then of course getting that shot on the par 3 12th over Race Creek and into makeable range. Of course, we saw Tiger make a 10, and we've seen many Masters dreams dashed on that famous par 3 12. So I look at those two shots there, Will, as sort of where I thought, okay, he did it. Now it's time for the coronation for him to win his second major.
Well, it's called Amen Corner for a reason, right?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you're talking about this, the approach into 11, the tee shot on 12, tee shot on 13. That's where so many rounds, it hangs in the balance when you're at Augusta National. And we did see, Cam Smith came up right before DJ and was not able to get up and down on 11 from a pretty similar spot. And so for Dustin to come up and, as you said, hit a really good pitch shot and save par there. From there, you start to try and find the landmines. Like, where exactly could it go sideways? 12 is certainly an example where, a miss by 10 feet is going to cost you 2 or 3 shots. And then 13 and 15, there's still water in play. But, yeah, once he got through those holes, knowing the advantage he has off the tee on 13 and 15 with those par 5s, I'm sure he was breathing at least a little bit more of a sigh of relief. And then rolling in birdies on 14 and 15 really kind of – he was able to let his guard down. But I agree. When you're going to look back at the clip reel of the 2020 final round, there were a couple of parts there where it started to look a little bit interesting. I don't think there was ever a point in which Dustin Johnson was in trouble. He never relinquished the lead, and I think that was important. But it was not exactly a 5-shot, runaway the entire way.
It's amazing when you look that, I mean, he joins, so many records in history when you think of he's, one of 4 golfers to win the Masters as the world number 1. When you look at, of course, we mentioned the, setting the record for a 72-hole score. But I look at the stat, Will, strokes gained, tee to green and approach. And if you combine those two, he almost gained like 5 strokes ahead of the field. And of course, we know Dustin as an amazing driver of the ball, but I think this week really affirmed how much he's improved on the approach game as well as the short game with his irons, wedges, and the putting. I know DJ mentioned in his post-round press conference about the putting lesson he had with Greg Norman, working with Claude Harmon, things like that. So it's just, to me, been a great transformation. That he's not just known as the guy, as the big bomber off the tee, but he's really become a complete golfer on the course.
Absolutely. And I think if you look back at his stats from 2016, when he really made that big jump in his career prior to this week, when he won the major, he got to world number 1, he was clipping off 2 and 3 wins at a time. It wasn't because he was driving it. He was always a great driver. It was because of the wedge game. It was because of the statistical improvement from 150 and in. That's the part that really gives him an edge. And as you mentioned, when you're adding, his ball striking, basically the tee to green or the off the tee plus the approach, he just has to putt decently for the week, and he's going to have a really good chance. And that's clearly something that we saw this week. He understands Augusta National's greens. This is now 5 years in a row. He's been inside the top 10. He was a runner-up last year. So there's not a lot of, nuance that he doesn't pick up on those greens. But absolutely, the driving has always been there for DJ. And I think that it's, as we saw a few years ago when he won at Oakmont, what separates him and what kicks him into this other gear that other players really struggle to keep up with. If you think of how well he was playing this summer, it's the iron game. It's 150 and in, and it's around the green.
And I think it was also amazing too, Will, just, after the round, just seeing how much this meant to him. Because I think I would characterize DJ as someone that's just unflappable on the golf course. I mean, we've seen, Canadians know him. He's an RBC Canadian Open winner, and he just was, again, very unflappable, goes about his business, very laid back when he's on the golf course. But to see him so emotional, I think just shows you, what, these athletes just go through in terms of the preparation and how much work they put into this. And I think given the year DJ's had, and certainly, he was, he had coronavirus a few weeks ago that, knocked him out of the game for a bit. And of course, him growing up so close to Augusta, you could just see how much this meant to him. And I think it was another side that many golf fans really didn't know DJ had within him, but it was really, I think, refreshing and authentic to see.
There have been a lot of firsts in 2020. Catching DJ speechless and on the verge of tears was not a first I expected to cross, and yet here we are. Absolutely. I mean, it was a great interview. After the round, he's in the green jacket. Amanda Balionis with CBS did a great job of just hitting on those points. And you're right. I think it has a lot to do with the proximity. Growing up in South Carolina, he went to school at Coastal Carolina down there, so he has a particular affinity for that part of the country. And I think that it speaks to the magnitude of so many things. It speaks to, the importance of this event. It speaks to, as we discussed, the importance of getting from one major to two, and then just everything that he's been through on and off the course this year. That, he's one of those guys that is going to put in the grind. And I do think that there was an aspect of he felt overshadowed by Brooks Koepka over the last couple of years, and people weren't talking about him, and they were drifting elsewhere for their stories. And now all of a sudden he comes out guns blazing this summer. He is a clear number one player in the world. He runs through the FedEx Cup playoffs, cashes a $15 million check, and we get to Augusta, and we're still talking about Bryson. And we're not talking about, Dustin Johnson, the world number one. And I agree. Some of that had to do with, he had COVID and he was out for a couple of weeks, but he did finish T2 last week in Houston. It's not like he's coming in on a slump, but he was somehow moderately under the radar coming into the week, between a lot of talk, understandably so, with Bryson. You talk about Tiger as the defending champ. You talk about Rory trying to get the career Grand Slam, and here's the world number one trying to wave his hands and say, hey, guys, remember me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the most news that DJ made before the tournament was his affection for the Masters sandwiches. I mean, it just felt like everyone was focused on Bryson, and rightfully so, and Tiger being the defending champion, like you said. But I think DJ just sort of flew under the radar and took advantage of that and said, remember me, because it wasn't a few months ago that he's a FedEx Cup champion, player of the year, and had a fantastic 2020 by all accounts on the golf course.
First of all, we have to give credit where credit is due. The Master sandwiches are phenomenal.
Yeah, of course.
Hang on right there. They are worth all the hype that he's going to give them. I hope for the Champions Dinner next year, he just rolls in just a plate of the sandwiches, and he comes out with the smallest Champions Dinner tab of anyone since Ben Hogan or something like that. But it's funny. That's the sort of stuff that gets clicks and that gets attention when it comes to DJ early in the week. And there's a lot of stereotypes that go along with him. But I do think it speaks to he's a relatively uncomplicated guy, and I think in a lot of ways that has helped him. If you look back at some of the losses he's incurred, whether it's Whistling Straits, whether it's Chambers Bay, both on the final hole, those alone would have broken mere mortals. Mm-hmm. And let's look at what how much scar tissue Jordan Spieth accrued from one major gone awry in 2016. And here's DJ just kind of racking them up. He put it OB at Royal St. George's in 2011, cost himself an Open Championship. He's finished second in all four majors. He dealt with kind of giving it up at down the stretch to Brooks Koepka last year at Bethpage. And here he is, the next week, the next month, the next year, and you don't notice anything about him that's differently. And I think that's because there isn't anything that's different. And he has this unflappable nature that really tends to work. And that's why the tears on the green with Amanda were a bit stunning, frankly, because he does seem so unflappable. But I think that's a big reason why he has been able to have the success he has had despite losses and heartbreak that would have really sidetracked a more, normal, quote unquote, player.
There were other golfers on the golf course beyond the winner, Dustin Johnson. I know that, the two golfers that got a share of second place, Cameron Smith and Sanjay, both shooting 69s today. They ended up being 5 back of Dustin Johnson, but how impressed were you, Will, with them? Because they certainly hung around there, I thought, for a lot longer than, many people probably would have predicted heading into today.
Yeah, I do think that it was an interesting dynamic in that, coming into the day, DJ was 4 shots up, but the 3 people that were closest to him were not exactly a murderer's row. I think if he would have had Justin Thomas or Rory or Bryson or Koepka in that group at 12 under, 4 shots back, maybe the approach, the demeanor is a little bit different, but that's how the leaderboard shaped up. And so of that trio, I was interested to see who's going to rise and who's going to fall. And as you mentioned, Sanjay and Cam Smith both acquitted themselves really well. I do think I was especially impressed with Sanjay because he's a Masters rookie, and we always know this is a place where there's a learning curve, and you really have to figure it out, and you have to play here a couple times before you're going to break through. You have to go back to Jordan Spieth in 2014 when he finished T2 as a Masters rookie, and you saw what he did the following year. I don't know if Sanjay is going to rout the field in April, but he does have the game certainly to win a major. Cam Smith finished T5 2 years ago. Now he adds a runner-up. Clearly, he's developing a bit of a major pedigree and a bit of an affinity for Augusta National. I think that speaks well for his future down the road.
For sure. And I mean, I thought, look, I mean, DJ was only at 1.1 ahead. So like they definitely cut the lead down considerably early on in the round. But I thought where it sort of went a bit off the rails, so to speak, was Sanjay's second shot on 5. Because of course, DJ hits it in the bunker. He then, it's looking like, he's fighting for par. Sanjay could have really put some pressure on him there, but then he hits sort of a wayward second shot. And then, of course, DJ settles down and gets back and holds his lead. But I agree with you. I mean, I think we're definitely seeing a lot more younger guys not afraid of the moment. And I'll say this. I think the fact that there were no patrons there, I think maybe it may have helped those guys like a Sanjay as a Masters rookie. And he's just saying, I have no pressure. I'm just going to go out and play the best I can to try to chase Dustin Johnson.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you look back at 2020, whether it's Colin Morikawa at the PGA, Matt Wolff at the U.S. Open, there has been an effect to boost the first-timers in those situations of not having fans, not having patrons this week. So I think that did help Sanjay to a certain extent. I will say he ended up making an all-world par on 5. He had it up and down from the junk back there. I don't recall seeing anyone back there in recent history. And then DJ ends up missing his par putt. So there was still that moment of doubt there coming off of 5, but it didn't take long, as you noted. DJ hits it in there on 6, makes a birdie, and he goes on from there.
Rory McIlroy, we mentioned earlier, trying to get the career Grand Slam. He finishes in a tie for 5th. And I don't know about you, Will. I mean, but, when Rory gets going and starts to, build a charge, I mean, social media loves Rory. And I think that storyline of him trying to join such a small class of people with the career Grand Slam is certainly intriguing. But, again, with Rory, it just feels like he has 3 great rounds, and then there's that one round you would like to just throw out the window. And here again at Augusta National, it's that first round of 75. I guess it's just a matter of, again, just multiple attempts of putting himself in the mix could maybe do it. But hey, there's a lot of great golfers that also haven't won the Masters. And I think Rory made the good point this week when he said, like, look, you have to earn it at Augusta National to try and win the career Grand Slam. What are your thoughts on just what you saw from Rory this week?
Yeah, I think you encapsulated it pretty well. I think there's no doubt at this point Augusta National and the Masters is in his head. For better or worse, he's going to have to deal with or try and find a way to sort through the demons and the close calls. I think that this will be a result that is incredibly deceptive when you look it up on Wikipedia in 2 or 3 years when we see it. He's going to sit there at T5 and you're going to say, I don't really recall him being in the mix. And it's funny that this is his second best finish ever at the Masters. He finished 4th in 2015 behind Spieth when he was 12 back after 36 holes. So there is an element, I think, of freewheeling it as we saw over this weekend that helps him. And maybe this is how he's going to get the jacket of maybe he's 3 or 4 down going into the last 9 and he just says, the heck with it, let's roll. And he puts off, a string of 4 or 5 birdies to kind of get into the mix. But, as you said, he is absolutely talented enough to win the Masters, but so were Tom Weiskopf, so was Greg Norman, so were so many other guys, Ernie Els, that come to mind of players who had the talent, and you thought when they're in their prime, they're absolutely going to get it, and they didn't get it done. He's 31 going on 32, so he's got plenty of prime years still ahead of him, but the more this goes on, the more we're still talking about it every year, every spring. Once we get back on a normal schedule, the bigger a hurdle it's going to be for him to try and get over.
I know that we mentioned how, I mean, for some of the golfers that just weren't in those final couple of groups. I mean, I look at a guy like Brooks Koepka, Justin Thomas, John Rahm. I mean, Bryson DeChambeau, certainly. I mean, a lot of talk coming in this week. He did make the cut, but, had a disappointing finish. Tiger Woods as well. I mean, I'm just curious for you, what were some of your sort of, guys that you thought underperformed this week. And for me, I would just say this. I mean, I agree with you that if a lot of those guys, some of the bigger names were in those couple of final groups, I think it could have maybe put a little bit more pressure on a guy like Dustin Johnson who had that 4-shot lead.
Yeah, there were certainly several guys that were in the mix there, but then there were some others that you kind of expected to be there that weren't. I look at a guy like Xander Schauffele, who I was very high on this week. I feel like I've spent the entire summer trying to predict a Xander win. It didn't come this week either, even after a strong opening round. He kind of no-showed over the weekend. But I'm interested now, especially after DJ won, I'm interested to see what Jon Rahm does, especially in the majors. He is putting together a great resume. He got to world number 1 this year. The majors are the next step for him, and he really has not gotten into the mix on Sunday. We saw him there yesterday. He's, share of the lead going into the final 36 holes, and then he has an issue on 8 where he kind of hits a shot that I'm very familiar with, the quick hook 3-wood that goes about 75 yards left. I've got that one in the bag for sure, but I want to see Jon Rahm get into the mix because I think that's important. As we saw with Bryson, he didn't just come out of the woodwork to win at Winged Foot. He finished T4 at the PGA the month prior. And I think getting into the mix, giving yourself opportunities like that is going to be very key to potentially getting into the winner's circle and getting the major that everyone expects to get, or that expects Jon Rahm to get sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I mean, Jon Rahm with that shot on 8, I think any recreational golfer can relate to that. But also I think he had the shortest post-round press conference after round 3. I think it was like 44 seconds. I don't think he was too happy with that. But I think for him on the golf course, what's good for me is while he isn't, outspoken and expressive, I think he certainly kept that a bit in check this week. And I think, going forward, I think he's just someone that's just too good not to be in the mix. Like, I just think he has too many good tools of his game. We've seen him win with, stacked leaderboards, good tracks. So I'm definitely excited to see what he does heading into 2021.
Yeah, this might be a little bit inside baseball, but I will say that Jon Rahm, more so than maybe every other star, when you come in off a hot round, you're not sure if the guy's going to talk to you. You try and think of this icebreaker question to at least get them started. And more often than not with golf media, it's going to be, how do you describe the round? Like, everyone knows you just had a bad round. No one wants to say, like, wow, that was a really crappy round. What do you think? So you just open it up with this generic, how would you describe the round? And let the player take it from there. And Jon Rahm does not tolerate that question whatsoever. He's been consistent in that for years. That happened again on Saturday, where you ask him that, and he says, well, how do you think I would describe the round? I think it was terrible. I played awful. I just lost a chance to win the Masters. So I think that to his credit, he's at least consistent in that remark. But I agree with you. I think that everyone in the golf media world, fans in general, do expect him to get a major at some point.
Speaking of certain golfers, I mean, I'm sure you made some picks, heading into this week. I'm just curious how they turned out for you, Will.
Well, I was on Team Xander. That didn't work out well. I was on Tyrrell Hatton, who low-key had one of the most disappointing years in the majors of anyone. He missed the cut in all 3 majors after being a top 10 player in the world. He's won twice this year. A lot of people expected a lot of big things out of him, including me. So those whiffed. I did have, with our friends at PointsBet and NBC, we had a prop on Bryson to make an eagle at some point in the tournament. He finally got there on Sunday. That one worked out well. There were a couple other props that hit. It was, it's fun, especially when you get events like this that have, casual fans. You got this weekend, we had cross-sport props with college football and NFL, and you get more people drawn into these events than potentially otherwise would, be watching. I think it's fun, and it gives you a little bit of, extra incentive to keep watching as Dustin Johnson is winning by 4 or 5.
Honestly, like, having College Game Day, I mean, I know it's on another network, so I won't mention the network, but it was.
Listen, I have no problem with College Game Day, ESPN.
Okay, no, it's all good. No, that's awesome. But that was pretty cool because I mean, here's hoping we may never have a November Masters again, but to have that once in a lifetime opportunity come to fruition and to see Lee Corso's big heads of the different golfers, that was pretty cool as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That was, as you mentioned, hopefully a one of a kind opportunity But, it's great to see them set up shop right there on the par 3 course, just across the street from the 10th tee. And, it doesn't get any better. Anytime you can get extra scenery from Augusta National, whether there's golf shots being hit or not, I'll take it.
I know we mentioned off the top about just the miracle of, the Masters happening and even 3 majors happening this year. Obviously, I think, it's interesting to look back and see on the 3 major championships, but I would say, Will, 3 worthy champions in Collin Morikawa, Bryson DeChambeau, and Dustin Johnson. Maybe just, your thoughts on the 3 majors that we had and just the fact that the PGA Tour was able to pull this off, because, boy, I remember that week and seeing the headlines when the Players' Championship was canceled, and it looked bleak, but here we are with a truncated calendar, but 3 major championships and 3 worthy winners.
Yeah, I think coming into, first of all, I agree. There was definitely a period there in June where you were wondering how it was going to go. But I think that going into it, once you realized the majors were going to happen, there was a question of, is there going to be an asterisk next to the winner of these tournaments? And if, no disrespect to my friend Jim Herman, but if Jim Herman comes through and wins the U.S. Open at the PGA, are we going to look at this and say, hey, what's this guy doing winning a major? But I think that the 3 that you got, all world-class players, all top 10 in the world, understandable. Maybe Collin Morikawa is earlier with the major than you would have expected, but everyone thought that he was on a path that it could have put that in position to get a major within a couple of years. So I do think that having those caliber winners for these 3 events, it avoids the asterisk. Maybe there's going to be an asterisk, I think, with DJ with the scoring record, because this course was definitely a little bit different than Masters that we've seen before in April. But in terms of the winners, in terms of how history will look back on these events, I think that they're just going to blend into the normalcy of the rest of the results, which I think for all parties considered, that's probably a good thing.
Yeah, I think the PGA was certainly the most tense, I would say. I remember on the back 9 there, at one point there were 5 guys tied for first on the 12th hole, and then a mixture of many guys within 2 shots of the lead, and then the U.S. Open and Masters was more just, a tour de force and a dominating performance by Bryson and DJ respectively. But I definitely agree with you on that Masters scoring thing. I think, yes, it is a tournament record. It's, forever etched into the history books. But, someone tweeted yesterday about Tiger's in 97. And Tiger won by 12 shots. And there were only, 4 players 4 under or better in that tournament. And obviously this tournament had a lot more scoring because of the softer conditions. But I think overall, as you said, 3 deserving winners. I definitely give the PGA as the best quality of the 3, just in terms of you can't beat, a cluttered leaderboard on Sunday and on the back 9. But hey, to have major championship golf, even if it was on different times of the year, I'll take it.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think that the PGA was certainly most exciting when you have, Bryson win by 6, DJ win by 5. There's not much you can do about that, but those guys clearly distanced themselves against elite competition, and you tip your hat to them in achieving that. But the drama was certainly reserved for that first one, and that was such a welcome respite after so long without a major to finally get one, and it was really dramatic coming down the back 9. That's one that we look back at fondly. But yeah, I think that sometimes we can get out of hand with these scoring records, and especially how they've piled up the last few years, and you've seen it in other sports. Sometimes it happens, but golf is always very sensitive with their record book. And even when Jordan Spieth was tying Tiger's scoring mark of 18 under from 97 to 2015, everyone looked back and they said, well, it's a little different. And as you mentioned, Tiger was lapping the field. And so that one still feels a little bit different. Ray Floyd winning in, I think, 75. There's a few where the guy just went out and lapped the field. And this didn't quite feel like that. The fact that Cam Smith now becomes the first player ever at the Masters with 4 straight rounds in the 60s and he doesn't win the tournament speaks volumes, to just how soft the conditions were. No disrespect to Cam. It was a great week, but I think that that's an amazing factor that no one had ever done that in Augusta history, and he does it, and he still doesn't even come close to winning, even though he was tied for second.
Last 3 questions for you, Will. I'm going to do a little bit of rapid fire here, what I've been doing for a lot of my Masters guests. So, if you were to create the Champions Dinner menu, what would be on it?
Ooh, that is a good question. I would probably go, I'm a seafood paella guy. If you want like a big, I think Sergio had that a couple years ago. That's a good go-to of like a hearty, a little starchy, and that'll be a crowd pleaser. I do like Tiger's milkshake move. He's very consistent with the milkshake. I think you have to have a strong closer to the menu, no matter how you go. But yeah, that would be a good way to go.
And then we talked about sandwiches. What's your go-to Masters sandwich?
I'm definitely team egg salad. I got some of the pimento in for this week that they shipped to a few of us, and that you can work as a spread, maybe on crackers, but it's so rich, it's hard to do that personally as a sandwich. But when I'm in the press building up there, yeah, give me one egg salad in the morning, a chicken biscuit, I'm good to go.
And finally, I mean, it's never too early to look ahead to 2021. Who's a golfer that you're gonna ride into next year to see if they can maybe win a major championship?
Ooh, that's a good question. We've had an hour to put 2020 to bed. We got to start thinking about 21. I do like the fact that I feel like we're done talking about Ricky Fowler as the next guy, right? Like that's just kind of, we've moved on from there. I think that, as we mentioned this before, but I do think that Rahm is going to be the guy going into this. Now that Bryson especially has his major and the way he won it, John Rahm's going to be world number 2. I got to look at the rankings and see, but I think he's probably the only guy in the top 5 or 6 in the world without a major. And so now, while it's not really, tapping your foot time of when are you going to get it, I think that that's going to be the next progression. And really the only thing left on his resume to get is, everyone expects him to get not only 1, but 2 or 3 majors, especially the Masters. This, the lineage he shares as a Spaniard with Olazabal, with Sergio, with Seve, it feels like this is a place where he could have a lot of success. And so he's absolutely going to be one of those guys, along with DJ, along with Bryson, that'll be topping the 2021 power rankings once we get there.
Well, it's been a fantastic year, ending, of course, with a crowning of a Masters champion, Dustin Johnson, the 2020 Masters champion. If you're a golf fan, you got to follow Will Gray. He's on Twitter, Will Gray GC, and you can follow all his content on NBC Sports. Will, thank you so much for putting a bow with me today on the 2020 Masters on the Weesesports Chronicles podcast.
Good to be with you, Lucas. Thanks for having me.